All right, thank you for all the presentations. I believe if you can hear me, you can still keep off the headphones. And when we go to the audience for questions, and put them on, please. Probably all the Dutchies in the audience saw a couple of days ago in the news that our national government changed their opinion about the zero emission zones in Dutch cities. Some Dutch cities are pushing back and saying that they will go ahead with implementing these zero emission zones. So we wanted to talk about that today and share our opinions, our thoughts. And please, if you have anything to add, please do. So Sonja, I wanted to ask you first. What do you make of this? What do you think it will have as an effect on entrepreneurs if they've been working on this for such a long time and now policy changes?
Yes, thank you, Margot. Can you hear me? Okay. Strange, because you don't hear yourself. Well, thank you for the question. Indeed, it's a very hot topic at the moment. It's a heated political debate at the moment. And I do think it's very important to take into account all kinds of entrepreneurs when planning for the future and making these zero emission zones. But I also agree there has been a large preparation process already for 10 years. This has been prepared, guided by the national governments, but together with all the municipalities who want to do this. There were many working groups, I think, trying to also solve issues for entrepreneurs. Also, entrepreneurs talked with municipalities on their perspective on this. And some companies already did big investments. So for them, I think it's a setback. And you can also see, I saw in media as well, the sectoral organizations and large companies, they urge the government to not change the things that are already put into place. And I do agree it's good to to take into account all different entrepreneurs. On the other hand, there's quite an extensive exemption process also. Companies can get an exemption to get into the city. And we don't have to change overnight, all of us. I think that's sometimes forgotten because it's a transition process. By 2030, we hope to have established this. But until then, as different entrepreneurs have different needs and smaller and medium enterprises have different possibilities, they can still enter the cities with diesel vans, but not the most dirty ones. So it's a process, slowly, year by year, step by step, going to 2030. But let's see how our politics decide.
Thank you for the explanation. Son, would you like to comment on this from the perspective of the city of Utrecht? Have you already made a decision what the city is going to do?
Well, the decision has already been made. So we went through a whole participation process. And then the final decision was made back in June. So we cannot go back. So we and 13 other cities will continue on 1st of January 2025. And I believe that there's plenty of exemptions possible. For example, for entrepreneurs that are close to retirement or that might go bankrupt when they have to buy an electric van. So there's a lot of thought going into how can we serve everyone but still make this transition happen.
Thank you for providing more insights about the transition phase as well, and that there are exceptions for certain types of entrepreneurs, and that you really try to help everyone with this transition towards the zero emission zones. Elliot, you used to live here in Utrecht. Now you moved to Manchester. Imagine Manchester wants to implement its own zero emission zone. What would be the first thing to recommend?
Many things. I think it's important for cities to really understand the logistics sector and all the movements that are happening understanding what actors are involved, what businesses are involved, and I don't know if that's necessarily the case with cities. I think it's as I was saying, a sort of a new people. It used to just be seen as a nuisance, and now people are trying to integrate it more into society. But I would also say employment law as well in the UK might have an implication, because in the Netherlands, a lot of the bikes are owned by the fleet managers or the actual companies. But in the UK, it's not the case. A lot of them are owned by the individuals who are cycling. And so they are forced to maybe buy the cheaper version online and with more dangerous batteries that could go on fire. So it really surprised me in the UK how that is limiting organizations. And people are even storing their bikes in bike sharing facilities in the city of Manchester. So this is a big issue for the city, because they have batteries that are sort of not checked, that are maybe shipped in from other countries. And these bike storage places then are a fire risk. So I'd also look at the employment law and have companies who are looking to utilize logistics vehicles to actually own them themselves and not push that onto their staff.
Thank you. And I think that's an important topic that you touch upon, the safety of the batteries. Also in the Netherlands, that's something that gets more and more attention, that we need to charge our batteries safely. Stan, a different topic. Some people are worried that we will have more and more of these big, ugly distribution boxes at the outside, at the outskirts of cities. Because cargo bikes hold less packages than vans, I think. Is that true? I don't know. Can we therefore assume that there will be more of those distribution centers? Or do you think cargo bikes can just replace vans?
I think a one-on-one, which Elliot also mentioned in his presentation, one-on-one replacement will, in some cases work, but in most it won't. Simply because the volume is different. I think it will only solve a part of the logistics puzzle, the cargo bike. So it's mostly, like Sonja mentioned, is mostly useful for time-critical inner city logistics or for service providers, not so much for the parcel industry. And the big boxes outside are mostly driven by e-commerce. So I think the best solution to get rid of those is order less, use less stuff. I think that's the bottom line, but that's probably not going to happen. We can try and make them more attractive, by the way, but that's a side note. I think we do need more logistics facilities in our cities if we want to transition to cargo bikes, but they can also be smaller and easier to implement in the urban fabric. Now we have these large cross-dock facilities on our outskirts. They will remain, but for the growth, we can probably do also with some smaller facilities dotted around the city on places where they are less of a nuisance.
Maybe add one perspective, because I think I agree that we might need more of those. But on the other hand, we need less space in the cities for all these large vehicles. So you can have urban planning more designed to people, to human activity, and also more green, more nature inside the city. So I think that would be a plus. But I am a positive person, so I always look for the bright side.
And I think the distribution hubs are sort of a indicator of how we viewed logistics over the last 10, 20 years, in terms of we put them on the edge of our cities. We don't want to look at them. We don't want to think about how the good arrives in the product arrives at our house or into the restaurant. But I think this debate about having hubs, smaller hubs in the city centre, is showing how we have acknowledged that they exist, that we are needing to tackle this, but also then incorporate them better into our city design and have them as also a store or places to meet, or have lockers where people go and collect their good, or have a changing room for the riders riding, or a place for them to have a break and to have a lunch. So I think this is a positive, and how they will look in the future will not be how we have seen them in the past, because we've acknowledged they exist and we want to incorporate them with the nature and with a better looking public space.
Good. And I completely agree with all of you that we can also allocate different functions. I'll get to you in a minute. That we can allocate different functions to the buildings as well, and that it doesn't always have to be these huge buildings, but can also be smaller. A question to all of you. When we move from vans to cargo bikes, there are also people needed to ride those cargo bikes. Is it fair? Can we ask people to change their behavior, to change their way of working to the cargo bike? It will radically change their workday, and will they need education? How will they have enough confidence to ride on those cargo bikes?
So two things. I think definitely people need to be, the riders and the workforce need to be educated and trained on how to use cargo bikes and told about the benefits. So that's, and given the option, it is a gradual shift. So it's not going to be overnight. And also there will be other vehicles still in fleets. It's not all cargo bikes. And the second thing is, when you say, is it fair? I think people would argue, is the climate, is doing nothing in a climate emergency fair for many people around the world? So I think the question of is it fair is a big question when it comes to us all changing in a climate emergency. I think when the countries around the world agreed the Paris Agreement, everybody said this is a great and difficult decision, but unfortunately that wasn't the end of it. People are going to have very unfair results of that, and people are going to have to change and adjust. So, it's something that isn't fair, but there are things change as well.
Thank you. I agree to what Stan said about the training and education. I think it's really needed. But I also think not all vans will be replaced by cargo bikes. We will still have vans. So you still have companies where you can be a van driver if that's your thing to do. And if you shift from a van to a cargo bike, I think there's also benefits for riders. And employers can also, like, maybe you can't use the van for your commuting to work anymore. And maybe you need a different thing. So employers can kind of accommodate it and maybe give more benefits or give some extra money or whatever. Because I think there's also maybe a role for the employer to make this happen. And then let's not forget, for some, I mean, if you drive a van all day, if it's not electric, it's a diesel van, and you wait and you're like in this fume and sitting in this van all day, it might be nicer to be outside and ride a cargo bike. But that's, of course, not for everybody. So,
very briefly, I think in Utrecht we can source from a whole untapped potential of workforce because it's a student city. We have 50,000 students here, and they typically don't want to drive around all day in a van, but riding around the inner city a couple of days or a couple of hours a day. And not having to go all the way to the outskirts to pick up a van or whatever. I think that will be a very attractive, like extra income for people that don't necessarily have a driver's license or just like to be outside and enjoy the beautiful Dutch weather, etc. So I think it will be the opposite of a nuisance, actually.
Okay, thank you for all your input. Stan, another question for you. When we have more cargo bike deliveries, I assume that means that we will also have more cargo bikes in our streets. But what happens to those cargo bikes when we're not using them? Will they be parked all over our sidewalks? Will that limit pedestrians in their space on the road? Does the city have any policy for that?
No. We don't have that problem yet. Well, we do actually have cargo bikes sharing scheme called Caluwé, and they are outside actually the whole day, and they are not stolen or destroyed or whatever. So you can leave them outside, but I would say if it's not a sharing scheme and it's like you bought a beautiful cargo bike with your business, then you would typically park them inside somewhere. we are not actively providing space for that as a city yet, because we don't see them so much yet. But we are thinking about it, because maybe if we provide these spaces in the city, where you can safely park them and charge them, then more entrepreneurs will maybe are willing to purchase one, because they don't have the space themselves. So there is a chicken and egg, I guess, where we can play a role. And we are thinking about this empty parking structure at Paardenveld, quite nearby. We can use that as a city for the next 10 years. Maybe we can, earmark a piece of that for entrepreneurs to park their cargo bikes. So we are thinking about that.
Okay, I'm curious what your answer will be in a year.
Yeah.
And if we have seen a change. My final question to all of you, and then we will open up the questions from the audience. Can you share your favorite example of an organization that is already using cargo bikes for its deliveries? Is there an organization that inspires you?
Shall I start? Okay. Okay, I didn't expect this question, but I think the one that pops up first is Mama Kookt. It's Mama Cooks in English, which is a hot meal provider to people that aren't able to prepare their own hot meals for whatever reason. And they deliver their meals with a cargo bike during rush hour, because everyone eats. Well, a lot of people eat during rush hour. And getting around the city during rush hour is by far the fastest in Utrecht with a cargo bike. Not the big ones, but like a regular one. And I see them pop up in every neighborhood. And it looks very human scale, very friendly, and I really like the cause. So that's my answer.
Thanks. I was also thinking my first thought was about a cooking company, which is larger in Amsterdam. But I think there's another example as well that I can name, which is a small company. I think I had the picture of them in my presentation as well. They deliver flowers by cargo bike, which is very sustainable. And also they have small vases together with the flowers to bring it to the customers.
Are they fake flowers?
They're fake flowers, okay. Yes. They're fake flowers, yes. Sustainable flowers, yes. That is. So they have the sustainable way of delivering them. So I think that's also an interesting example.
And for me, it's not really happened yet, but the sort of, I'll look at services and maintenance users of cargo bikes in Amsterdam. They're just about to start a pilot of, it's called a Molo pilot, I think it's called. And this is where they will have they will provide their own cargo bikes for maintenance and repair people to utilize. So moving away from sort of individual ownership of vans, but instead people will turn up to the site with their tools, maybe in their own van. So maybe not losing individual ownership, but they'll turn up to the edge of the city after they've booked a cargo bike for the day, park up their van, take their toolbox from their van into a light electric vehicle or a cargo bike, and then use that for the day. And so I think this is an interesting project to see how it goes. It runs until, I think, the end of 2026. And that's one to keep an eye out for. I don't know if I explained it well, but there you go.
Thanks. I saw one question over there. You still want to ask it?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Richard Armitage from Manchester Bikes in England. And I've got two questions. One is to Stan. Is Utrecht Gemeente using cargo bikes in the delivery of its own services? And what's that experience been like? And the second thing is to, first of all, explain one of the problems we face in Manchester, which is that since December last year, Manchester City Council decided that nobody could bring an e-bike into any of its property whatsoever, whether that property was owned or rented. And they did this on the grounds that it was all going to burst into flames. You were also not allowed to take a battery out of a bike and charge it on those premises. So immediately my bike shop has seen a decline in sales to Manchester City Council staff who are beginning to get very interested in buying our e-bikes and our family cargo bikes. The reason for this is stated is because their insurance company has told them so. And across the UK, this is becoming a huge problem. So my question to yourselves is, are you experiencing this as well? And what do you think the hell we should do about it?
Thank you. First, Stan, if you want to answer the first question.
Yes, the first question was for me. I believe there's a gemeente Utrecht bike here somewhere. Okay, it is here. I haven't seen it yet. That is a bike that inhabitants can borrow if they need to move something or for whatever reason. Then some of our colleagues are using bikes as well for small tasks in the public space. So maybe repairing something like a bench or whatever. But we're also using light electric vehicles, which are not bikes, mostly for garbage collection. In the inner city, we cannot use your typical garbage trucks. They're very heavy. So the wharf sellers, they cannot carry those. So there we use light electric vehicles to do the garbage collection. And a lot of my colleagues ride electric bikes. I ride an electric bike and I charge it inside of my house.
I don't have an electric bike. I have a normal bike. But then in any case, it is becoming a problem as well in the Netherlands, with e-bikes not being allowed within parking garages, for example, or at the station in bike parking. So I do know it's a problem there as well. And we are looking into this, how we can solve this, because we need to do something about this. And there's a working group together with the government, with the fire department, with all these different parties involved in this. And actually, my colleague is part of this working group, and we try to have some guidelines or find some solutions for this. And one of the things that is already happening is that some insurance companies verplichten, oblige the companies to have what is this in English? A facility, a kluis? A vault, where you can charge your vehicle. And you charge your e-bike or your cargo bike. So kind of a vault where the batteries are taken out by the people working there in the stalling departments and then charged there. So then it's allowed because the insurance wants it to be like this. It's a safe solution because if it kind of explodes or if it sets fire, then it's at least it's in a controlled situation. That's what, well, I'm not the one inventing this. And we are looking if we can make these vaults more available or more, because we're looking if we can have them added to our fiscal arrangements for tax deduction to make it more feasible for companies to invest in this. So that's a thing I can offer you. And
those vaults or lockers for charging batteries for e-bikes are already in use by the Dutch railways. We have public transportation bikes, and at 4 stations we have electric public transportation bikes, but they are charged inside train stations. So they have special vaults if it catches on fire that it will not expand.
So hearing this conversation, I'm just wondering, is the same discussion, for example, in the UK happening around batteries for electric cars? Because they also are put on fire and some garages are burned down with houses on top of it. Is the same thing? I just don't know.
Thanks for raising that point, Angela.
I just wanted to add an example that I thought was wonderful. I'm in Burlington, Vermont, in the U.S., and we have a lot of parks and forests in the city. And the Parks Department actually does all their forestry with a cargo bike, well, a fleet of cargo bikes. We had a storm a couple weeks ago. A couple trees went down, and it was the coolest thing to see all the forestry guys with chainsaws and everything off road. By the way, not even on pavement, out in the forest, trimming trees and stuff, and it was great. And I was just going to add on the battery discussion. I don't know how many of you drive EVs, but this is sort of a common issue that people talk about. And I don't know if the discussion's happening, but if you compare it to gasoline cars, the rate of cars that burst into flames, I guess, is significantly higher for a gas car. So there's a lot of misinformation about it. And the last thing I would say is I would check out what's happening in New York City with electric bikes. There was a mandate to do UL-tested batteries. So only UL-tested batteries can be sold in New York City. And that's a testing procedure for batteries. So it's an interesting discussion.
Thanks.
Yeah, so I would like to ask 2 questions about parking bikes. As you can see, I have a bike that houses a lot of expensive equipment, so I'm never parking it out on the street. But I know from experience that finding an office or a working place where you can ride it inside is very difficult. If it's ground floor, it's usually expensive because it's supposed to be an office or a shop. So there's a challenge for cities. It's more of a statement than a question, I guess. But my second question is about hubs. We in the Netherlands there have been these sort of mobile supermarkets, how you call it, like Gorillas, Flink, they had hubs all over cities, and I can remember most of them have gone because they went bankrupt, but the neighborhoods were not happy with those hubs. So are solutions being thought of for those kind of inner city hubs?
Good question. Thank you.
Okay. We typically do not like to see a lot of logistics activity in neighborhoods, like sleepy neighborhoods. And that's where it went wrong, because often these delivery companies that deliver in 10 minutes, they have all these guys waiting outside to do a delivery, and that was most of the issue. And of course a lot of quick bikes around the sidewalks. When we look at where to maybe develop a micro hub, or allowing to have someone develop a micro hub because we're not doing it ourselves, then definitely we would look at the direct vicinity. Does it create a nuisance for people that live there? Maybe families, children? Is there a school nearby? Those are definitely considerations that we would make. And this also limits the number of places where we can do this. So no, we don't have many places we can do this. We don't need many places. We just need a few in a city the size of Utrecht. But like an empty parking structure, which is also nice because that is, it is the transition in motion. We're going to go from a lot of private cars doing nothing in a parking structure to a lot of activity with like human scale sized vehicles in that parking structure. That is a perfect place to do that.
And maybe can I comment to your first statement / question? I know in the city of Utrecht there are now lots of areas in neighborhoods where you can park bikes as well, right? And so that's locked, and only people who live in that neighborhood, they can access the building. So that would be a solution if you trust your neighbors.
My colleague who's in charge of that is really struggling to find new places to do free parking of bikes. Because those are also premises that you could use maybe for other things like housing. We also have a housing crisis. So there is, again, that battle for space going on. But we do have quite a few, but they're also very quickly very full.
At least they're used well. Are there any other questions from the audience? Small.
just to say that if anybody wants to talk about the battery issue, I'll be here.
Yeah, I think it's going to resolve itself, that problem, because safer chemistries are coming onto the market, amongst other things. But I was going to ask a question, mainly, I suppose, of Stan, which is I observe so much thinking and planning going into these changes, and I'm wondering if it's actually much more simple than many of us think. Bollards are our friend. Do we really need so much of this planning? We just need to obstruct big vehicles, and then the problem will start to resolve itself. The entrepreneurs will buy the small vehicles.
Bollards are our friends. That's not what our colleagues say who are in charge of them, because they break a lot and they're very expensive, and you get very interesting Twitter feeds showing every car that's on top of a bollard. But I think you're right. I explained about the action plan. And actually, our government, the deputy mayor that's in charge of mobility, said, okay, go and try this. But if it doesn't work, we're going to plan B. And plan B is lock the city for big vehicles. So she challenged us, and we're trying to make that 5% decrease in logistics movements. But if we're too far off, then maybe we will obstruct access to the city more. It's also one of the tools that we will use in this period. So next year, we will decrease window times for regular vehicles. So now it's only for the pedestrianized zones, but we will implement window times for the whole city center. So no more regular logistics vehicles will be allowed after noon, which is actually a very big step. And then entrepreneurs will hopefully will look at other options.
How do you manage the backlash from businesses or from residents with all these restrictions? Because in UK, this is a big problem.
Participation, I think, yeah. Inform people ahead of transitioning. But that's maybe a stupid thing to say, but it helps if you involve people at least.
So what I hear more and more from cities in the Netherlands is they have a special bakfiets, cargo bike, with branding of the city. So for example, the city of Utrecht there, but they also do this in Rotterdam. And whenever they have a new plan in a neighborhood, in an area, they go there with that branded cargo bike. So people see, hey, there are people from the city here. We can ask them questions, we can give our input, we can share our opinions. And I hear lots of positive feedback from Rotterdam, because people feel like they have something to say about their own neighborhood. It's not just the city deciding for them. They really have an influence.
Yeah, what I might add is that we also have two people on our payroll that are called logistics brokers. And their sole job is to speak to entrepreneurs about how they organize their logistics and share all the alternatives that are out there. Also to calculate with them what does it cost to replace your fossil fueled van with an electric one, but at the same time say, hey, why not a cargo bike? Or why do you do your transport on your own? Why not hire a transport company that does it for you? So that is some way to help as a city in a transition. And before we implement any strict measures, we will talk on several tables with the transport business, with the shipping business, with the recipients of the goods. On all different tables, we will have those discussions.
Also in line with what Margot was saying, I think in the UK, for instance, there's a big problem with the public sector outsourcing a lot of its public engagement work. People who work in the public sector may not actually be comfortable or used to engaging with the public, and I think that's sort of quite alienating and something that needs to change going forward. So if a UK specific thing, like for instance.
If there are no further questions, then I would like to thank all of you for attending the session. Thank you for your presentations and joining the panel.